We did it! We painted the whole house, and without getting a drop of paint on anything but the flop and flotsam, what's that?
Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pub Stomp MTG, and in today's video I'll be going over my top 10 commanders from Duskmourn House of Horror. And before I do get started on that topic, this set was absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of elements I truly did like. One thing that did stand out to me when reviewing this set, there's not a whole lot of legendary creatures, which honestly it feels like a breath of fresh air. Alright, let me retrace that because there's still a decent amount of legendaries, but nowhere near the amount of legendaries that Bloombro had, and of course Outlaws of Thunder Junction. That had too much legendaries in my opinion. I want to say Outlaws of Thunder Junction had like 52 legendaries in that set, and Bloombro had around like 34 or something. And so it looks like, if I'm counting correctly, there's around like 23 to 24 new legendaries in Duskmourn, so they're kind of going down a little bit more with the legendaries, which honestly is very refreshing and nice, because I feel like it's very convoluted when you have so much legendary creatures. It feels like they kind of lose their favor in a way. In this video I will be discussing commanders from the Commander Precon product and the main standard set. I wanted to focus on commanders that are unique. I also wanted to focus on how strong they are, and honestly there's a lot of other ones that are based off of my opinion. There's some that I couldn't resist, especially with my number 1 choice. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about my number 10 spot. So let's kick it off at number 10 with Crackling Nest. For 3 black and a green, it's a 5/5 body legendary artifact creature scarecrow. It does have menace and reach. Whenever it does enter, or whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, each player creates a tap 2/2 black bird creature token with flying. The tokens are goaded for the rest of the game. So what I find interesting about this commander is the fact that it's focusing on Delirium, but not really Delirium, because you're focusing on playing those cards, not putting them in the graveyard. In order to meet that Delirium cost, you're actually just straight up casting things with 2 types. And if you pay attention closely, whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, that does include lands. You can't cast lands, but you can play them, and they will trigger Renmaw as long as they have 2 different types. So you have a land and an artifact, or a land and enchantment. Those will work when you do play those, and you'll trigger Renmaw that way. The same can be said for artifact creatures, artifact enchantments, and kindred spells like kindred, instant, or sorceries. I feel like as far as uniqueness goes, this is pretty good. I love how it has reach, because of course scarecrows are trying to scare away flying birds around everywhere so they don't eat crops, and this absolutely looks like a menace, so it's deserving of that ability too. But this card synergizes with a lot of different cards. Of course token doublers are going to be very good, like Parallel Lives. But if you were to make this deck, I think the best suggestion for you would be Primal Vigor. I know it's a little expensive, but it is worth it. Because of that first ability, if 1 or more tokens would be put on the battlefield, twice that many of those tokens are put on the battlefield instead. Notice that it's not just on your battlefield, but it's everybody's battlefield as well. So hey, would you look at that? Instead of making 1 token for each player, you're going to be making 2 instead when you cast those types, or when he enters the battlefield. Again, diving into the flavor of this card, I absolutely love it because it's scaring all the birds away, and they're goaded for the rest of the game, attacking all the other opponents instead of the scarecrow player himself. So I absolutely feel like Wizards nailed it out of the park with this one. But now let's focus on my number 6 spot. This one is pretty good. I actually like the design of Nico. So this card does read, when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 shard tokens. You can pay 2 and tap it. Exile target non-legendary creature you control. Shards you control become copies of it until the beginning of the next end step. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So here you go everybody, here's your 100th Blink commander, but this one's good, I promise. This one is actually pretty powerful because you can focus on a little bit of an attack trigger theme. Of course, I would also recommend some flicker spells so that you could flicker Nico, so that you can make more shard tokens, and when you have more shard tokens, you can make them copies of a specific creature on the battlefield and deal some damage potentially. I feel like Nico would work perfectly with combat triggers like Enduring Curiosity. Say for example you have 2 shard tokens on the battlefield and Enduring Curiosity. You decide, hey, I'm going to use my commander's ability to make those shards into Enduring Curiosity, and you go ahead and swing with those 2 shard tokens. You're going to be drawing 4 cards because they will trigger each other each individually. You could potentially lean into more token doubling. I wouldn't really recommend it though, because I'd rather flicker Nico a bunch of times to get that value of making shard tokens. I mean, you can add in an Anointed Procession and Mondrak Flurry Dominus to make more shard tokens when you blink it. So again, this is a pretty familiar mechanic with Azorius, but with a new twist with adding those shard tokens and trying to do something with them, to be honest. But now I'm going to move on. Let's talk about my number 8 spot. This one is pretty powerful. It's pretty simple though. Kona Rescue Beastie is one insane commander. I mean, you can throw it in the 99 and it'll do a lot of work. So let's read what it does. So for 3 and a green, legendary creature, beast survivor, and it does have the survival ability. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Kona Rescue Beastie is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. That's right, a permanent card anytime a permanent. That is extremely powerful. There's a lot of ways we could absolutely abuse that if you plan on making Kona specifically. Honestly, one of the more fun build arounds that you could probably take advantage of. Of course, you could just throw a big giant green creature good stuff deck and make it work. But I would recommend going outside of the box because you could put any permanent onto the battlefield. And there may be situations where you don't want to swing in with your commander to make it tap, so there's another option with vehicles. I think this could be a fun and interesting vehicle commander because it's just in mono green. And immediately when I thought about the vehicle theme with this commander, I first thought about Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. I remember this card, especially when I was playing Standard. It was a nightmare to deal with. Probably not so scary now. I haven't looked at the card forever, but when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to a target creature, planeswalker, and opponent control. I know that does seem very minimal in an EDH game, but I like it enough where if you made a fun artifact vehicle theme, I think it'd be very enjoyable. And this is one commander I actually haven't made a deck tech around, so let me know down below in the comments if I should make this deck tech specifically. So I guess let's jump ship to the number 7 spot and talk about Cayenne Corrupted Memory. To me, I find this pretty powerful as a tempo commander for 2 green and a blue with a 2/2 body legendary creature illusion. As long as Cayenne's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as Cayenne's power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. And whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Cayenne. So this is basically doing the Simic thing of drawing cards. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but at least it's limiting you in the way where you want to flash things in, but you need to make sure you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter, and change the power of Cayenne to do a non-creature or a creature spell. Plus, this can be a serious Voltron commander because you're constantly drawing cards, you're putting 1/1 counters on Cayenne. This could get absolutely huge too. And I think this could get up there pretty quickly, especially if you have some ways of giving extra 1/1 counters to Cayenne when she puts 1/1 counters on herself. But I will say, if you have some kind of hardened scales effect, you might be limiting yourself because obviously you want to have 1/1 counters go on her to make it odd or even the next turn. And if you had a hardened scales on the battlefield, you'll always be putting 2 1/1 counters on it, making it either always odd or always even. I will say that's just something I would look out for when building this deck specifically. So this is doing your typical normal Simic thing of putting 1/1 counters and drawing cards, but I will say it's unique in putting 1/1 counters specifically on Cayenne to increase her power, whether it's odd or even, so that you can cast those spells. So this commander is unique in that aspect. And the next commander is super angsty on my number 6 spot with Winter. This could be a pretty salt-inducing commander too, by the way, just warning you. So let's read what it does. So for 1 black, red, and a green, a 3/4 body with ward 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws 2 cards, so that might be an upside. Why would this be salty? Well, that last ability of Delirium. As long as there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent's maximum hand size is equal to the 7 minus the number of those card types. So this does play into the group hug theme, but you can make it into a total arch enemy situation if you have like Shield or the Apocalypse or that new Razorkin Needlehead. And of course that Jin-Jitaxis-like effect of having Delirium is pretty insane. If you play this right and you have a lot of different card types in your deck, you can make this absolutely a monster that nobody wants to play against. I do like how this is trying to be friendly, but in the end it's really just trying to backstab you, and I think that actually is what happens in the story. I mean, come on, seriously, look at him in the image. The way he's holding that knife, it looks like he's gonna throw that at somebody backstabbing him anyways. But enough about that, let's talk about my number 5 with Victor Valgavov Sensual. I feel like this is a pretty unique twist on enchantments, so let's read what it does. So for 1 white and a black, it's a 3/3 body. It has the Eerie ability. Whenever enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, surveil 2 if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If this is the second time, each opponent discards a card. If it's the third time, put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. In my previous deck tech, I talked about how this almost reminded me of Omnath Locust of Creation. They both share that ability in a way where if something enters the battlefield, whether it's a land or enchantment, you get a trigger, but then when another enchantment enters, you get a separate trigger, and if it's like the 3rd or 4th time, you get another trigger after that. Besides that point, this one looks pretty sweet as an enchant fall. That's what I called it in that previous video, enchant fall commander. You get a surveil to see what's on top of your library, and if it's a big giant scary creature, you could just put it into your graveyard, and if you have a couple enchantments to play that turn, you could get to that last ability to cast that big giant creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. Plus, not to mention, you make your opponents discard cards so that you could basically return any creature from a graveyard, graveyard, so it doesn't even have to be your own graveyard. If you have somebody else that has like a big giant scary creature in their graveyard, you could just take that away from them on that 3rd trigger. So this commander is pretty unique, but let's move on to the number 4 spot, and this one is Valgavoth himself. And I will say, as far as uniqueness goes, this is not as unique as compared to other cards on the list that were previously mentioned, but I feel like a lot of people are downplaying how powerful this card is, so let's read what it does. So for 2 black and a red with a 4/4 body, has flying and ward, pay 2 life. Whenever opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a 1/1 counter on Valgavoth, Howler of Souls, and draw a card. Sometimes it's the simple abilities that will really get the deck going and could be a really good card advantage engine. Of course, you have to build around it specifically, and if you have one of those effects like a Shieldred or a Razorkin Needlehead on the battlefield, you get to draw a card when they draw a card on their upkeep and put a 1/1 counter on Valgavoth too. Typically, people will be losing life on their turns, whether the fetch landing, they lose a life there, shock land, they lose a life there too if they want it untapped. So again, I like the simplicity of the commander, and honestly, it's pretty powerful. I know a lot of people are downplaying it, but I think it's great. And we're moving down to number 3. This one took me by surprise because it's a new concept of mill with the Mind Skinner. For triple blue, so it's 3 mana for a 10/1. That's pretty crazy stats. Plus the Mind Skinner can't be blocked, so there's got to be some kind of catch, a 10/1 that can't be blocked. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. So that's basically the downside, or would you really even call it a downside, because you're going to be milling everybody for 10. At least when you deal combat damage with a Mind Skinner, that's not even accounting for other creatures on the battlefield, or if you do some sort of equipment or aura theme with it, you can make it super powerful, swing ahead for a lot of damage, or should I say a lot of mill. But that does bring the big question, would this be better as a Voltron commander, or would it be better as a go wide, put a lot of creatures that are unblockable to swing away? But I feel like personally Voltron strategy is the way to go because it can't be blocked itself and it already has 10 power. Why not make it more and deal a lot of damage in the form of mill? I never thought I would be putting a mono blue commander at a number 3 in any of my commander slots, but this is well deserving. But let's move along and talk about my number 2 card with the Jolly Balloon Man. This card is very reminiscent of a lot of different childhood fears. Of course, this most notably reminds me of it because of the balloons, especially with that ability of making red 1/1 balloon creature tokens. Plus, I just have to comment on the art, how wild it looks that he's literally just blowing up heads to be in balloon shapes. Besides the art, what does it do? So for 1 red and a white, it's a 1/4 body with haste. You can pay 1 and tap it, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other colors and types, and it has flying and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So there are some similarities to Kiki Jiki, but there's some differences obviously. You have to pay 1 and tap it with a Jolly Balloon Man at sorcerer speed. While Kiki Jiki, you could just tap another creature and not have to worry about paying 1 into it. However, with the Jolly Balloon Man, you could copy non-legendary creatures, and there's a lot of non-legendary creatures that have great ETB and death triggers. Plus, the Jolly Balloon Man will make 1/1 red balloon creature tokens that are copies of it, all the while Kiki Jiki will make just a complete copy of that other creature. So this card is pretty sweet. I actually plan to play it in a gameplay episode in the future, so if you want to go check that out, make sure to stay tuned. But now we're moving down to my number 1 spot, and this one is incredible. I absolutely love it, and not a lot of people are talking about it surprisingly, and that's the Master of Keys. This one I think is the best commander of the entire set. For X, white, blue, and a black with a 3/3 body, has a legendary enchantment creature, Horror. It does have flying, and when it enters, put X 1/1 counters on it and mill twice X cards. Each enchantment card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards in your graveyard. So the reason why I like this is the fact that you could build this a lot of different ways. You can make this a CDH commander. I will be honest, I actually made this right away when I saw this got spoiled. I had about like 80% of the cards, so I just made the rest of the deck. As a CDH commander, it is pretty decent. It's an infinite mana outlet, and you have ways of reanimating creatures from the graveyard like a Thassa's Oracle with an animate dead to the battlefield to win the game that way. Outside of the CDH applicability, this could be a really good casual commander. This can scale with the game. It's just a 3/3 for 3 mana, but if you put any mana into the X, you're putting that many 1/1 counters on it. And of course, you're milling twice X cards, which you could use later on with that escape. Plus, not to mention, this has some amazing art. One of my favorite arts of the entire set. So I can't talk enough about this commander. This commander is excellent. One of my favorite commanders of the entire set for sure, and that's why it was deserving for me to be number 1. But I would love to hear from you. What are your favorite commanders of the entire set? Which ones do you plan on building around? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you can, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.